Fuck it, we'll do it live. Quote attributed to Stanley.
Bill O'Reilly, is that you?
No, it's not attributed to him, but yeah, we're gonna do this thing live. Can't wait for this one. We've been building up to this for quite some time. The many monikers this guy probably has nowadays.
Old Stan.
Old Stan. Yeah, funny enough, this is where the term stanning comes from. If you're a big stan of someone, it's because of him. It's simply not true. But Stanley Kubrick is his name. Yeah. Maybe as we go through the episode, we'll sprinkle in some monikers for him as I discover them online somewhere in the deep recesses of the annals of film critics. But yeah, Nolan and I have really kind of skirted talking about him, mostly due to my own inability to watch one of his movies, just for being distracted by other things. But I finally sat down and watched Barry Lyndon a couple months back. But at any rate, yeah, we're going to talk about Stanley Kubrick. Not the father of film, but he certainly changed the game, if you will. Do we want to lay down the thesis for the episode or build up to it?
Up to you.
I think it would be worth mentioning at the beginning, just so people are clear on our stance on him.
Yeah, just easily one of the best filmmakers to ever live.
Yeah. Nolan and I are huge fans of him, and I think that is with good reason. Obviously, film and art is a matter of perspective, but as you and I talked off air about Stanley Kubrick, and we've had many conversations about him, but in leading into this episode, the reason why he's one of the best for us is because of his body of work. Plain and simple, is quality over quantity. I mean, he was operating in the film industry for what, 40 years? Just almost 50.
Yeah, closer to 50, but 40 is a better number.
And in that span of time, I guess the average movie audience member would be surprised to know that he only has 11 films. Just because, you know, people nowadays who are thinking of directors, like in the span of 40 years, you'd think they'd have more like, you know, double that at least.
Well, I had 13, not 11, but
yeah, but for the sake of,
we're only going to talk about 11.
Yeah, exactly. It's worth pointing out that he did have 13, but as we've discussed, typically it takes like 2 to 3 films for a director. As you said, I think they don't come out of the box fully ready to put everything together, but mostly just because he's one of the most influential and powerful directors of the 20th century. I think it's even if you don't like Stanley Kubrick, you have to admire his ability as well as his body of work, and have to respect what he did for the film industry and for just film in general. How I would argue he did not bend to the demand of studios, and very clearly had his own agenda and own direction in mind in creating his movies, and he didn't really allow that to bend to anyone else. But I think a lot of that also has to do with his own personality, and what he sort of was attracted to with art as well.
Yeah, I would argue that he successfully he successfully worked his way into the film industry, perfected his craft, and then transcended the studio system and was able to largely do the projects that he wanted to do on a time schedule that he wanted to at a budget level he wanted to. So he basically worked out a little corner of the film industry for himself and then played in the sandbox for like 30 years.
Mm.
It's like 2001: A Space Odyssey was a huge success, and that was kind of what let him then do his own thing for the following 30 years. Everything before that is firmly within the studio system, and I would argue, with the exception of Doctor Strangelove, are extremely rudimentary films that some are better than others, but they're not anything particularly special from a filmmaking perspective, from a success perspective, from a directorial perspective. They're, I would argue, more run of the mill, like a studio movie. And I only like say that because, like, you know, a studio movie is more of a product. It's less of an artful endeavor. I wouldn't whole scale say they're artless, but by and large, the goal of them is to just generate a profit. It's not to do anything else. And I think Doctor Strangelove obviously is the bridge between that period of his life and then his ability to work as an artist and make the things that he wanted to make. Uh, and you see that in Doctor Strangelove in quite a number of ways, like set design, production design, humor, philosophy, politics. Because, you know, I mean, it is like the ultimate Cold War movie in terms of sort of showing what the threat is in modern day American life and then giving you an answer to it.
Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah.
Definitely. Do we want to start off with just by mentioning his early movies and then skipping over to sort of the ones that we would like to start with and keep going through there?
Yeah, yeah. So it's worth noting.
Let me just you can keep talking. I'll be right back.
So it's worth noting that, like a lot of the directors that we've talked about before on the show, Kubrick didn't start off as a filmmaker. He started off as a photographer, and I think he spent probably 10 years as a photographer, like a commercial photographer. He worked for Life magazine, and eventually he grew more and more interested in filmmaking over photography, and that's when he made his feature film Fear and Desire, which I assume Reese has no interest in talking about. I have no interest in talking about. It's a mediocre student film, completely amateurish. um, Clearly the budget is very small, and there's a lot about it from a directorial perspective that, you know, Kubrick probably needed to learn by failing before he could actually go on and make something memorable or of quality.
Mhm.
You ever seen Fear and Desire?
No.
I guess I'd say don't. I suppose it's maybe worth watching as a historical artifact. Um, I mentioned before off camera that it's like very anti-war. Like
Mhm.
it's basically just like a bunch of people in the woods metaphorically examining war. Um, but he basically just made the movie better. later in his career. Doctor Strange, like you can see blueprints of what he would do in Doctor Strangelove with some of the themes of war, and then later on in Full Metal Jacket. But those are like real movies, whereas Fear and Desire is not. It's hard to say it's a real movie as opposed to either just like a project that a student made or um, an outright failure.
Gotcha.
Which Kubrick didn't disagree with, and even went so far as to pull it from circulation so that people wouldn't watch it.
That's
His
funny.
second, yeah, he hated it. His second film was Killer's Kiss. Have you seen this one?
No.
It's like a run of the mill noir movie from the 50s. There are plenty of great noir films from the 50s. This ain't one of them. Not a memorable movie. Um, you can see this as a clear bridge between Kubrick as a photographer and an amateur filmmaker to The Killing and Paths of Glory, which he made after this, but this still has a lot of the warts that would come with Kubrick being an amateur filmmaker. Uh, the screenplay is at least better than Fear and Desire. Like there's a flow to this movie. It has more of a backing of like a professional stamp to it, but it still feels largely amateurish. Like had a small budget, production value just isn't there. There's nothing too remarkable about this. I believe that the ending, this is one of the few Kubrick movies that just has like a happy ending, which I recall being the studio's desire and not Kubrick's desire, which does change the movie quite a bit. And that's something Kubrick would learn to ignore later on. Both what the what the producers told him to do versus what he wanted to do, especially when it came to having a movie with a happy ending, because that
Yeah.
is something he would not repeat often. So after that, he made The Killing, which I assume you have seen.
No.
No, brutal. Uh, this one is worth watching. This is an actually great like noir crime movie about some dudes who do a heist.
Yeah, this one I think has continually eluded me because every time I sit down to watch it, I can't find it somewhere. And I don't want to like stream it and have it just look bad.
Fair enough. Well, I don't want to spoil it then. You've seen the ending before of that, I'm certain, because of
Okay.
the ending of the movie has been copied like 8 or 9 times. Uh,
Wait, what is this is completely no, it's somewhat relevant. What's Christopher Nolan's first movie called?
Following.
Okay. That's what I thought. I somehow thought it was like slightly more related to it. Like I thought it was like just called The Killer instead of The Killing. Got it.
No, but there are multiple movies called The Killing and The Killer and Killing and
Yeah.
Kill, like if it has the or no the.
Some derivative, yeah.
There's also a Hemingway story, I believe, called The Killer or The Killing. All kinds.
Hmm.
But this is really where I think his career starts to take off. Uh, Basically, if you just ignore the first two, I would argue there are plenty of filmmakers who did something similar. The heist movie seems to just be like a lightning rod for writers and directors to converge on. It's usually easy. There's some sort of formulaic nature to writing them. Uh,
I think
and
we should just sit down and write one, honestly. Scrap our cabin script and come back to that and just do a good heist.
It's possible. I do sort of hate the heist genre.
Yeah, but lightning rod it. Just gotta get that going.
The first line of the movie will be "You son of a bitch, I'm in," and then the last line of the movie, that's the main character's bleeding out because everyone's been shot 100 times, is "You son of a bitch," and then he dies.
And then a quarter of the way through, it's the old adage. Oh God, just completely.
I'm too old for this shit.
Yeah, I was gonna say it leaped out of my head as soon as I started down that road. Must be getting too old for this shit. Yeah.
Well, I would say it's not even worth trying to write a heist movie until you've seen that, The Killing. If only because, like, there's a very specific visual story being told that is not the literal plot, which is why I think it's an important Kubrick film, because something Kubrick did was essentially transcend the told story being whatever information you're passed via dialogue and like the setting that it takes place in. Because
Hmm.
I would argue by and large the difference between a good or a great movie versus like a phenomenal one is one that actually knows how to tell a story with pictures, and where the story being told with pictures has a interesting relationship to the story being told with words, because fundamentally film is not supposed to be, or I would argue is not as effective when it is told via words as opposed to with pictures.
Yeah.
Uh, because you can have, and with the heist genre in particular, that's always a problem where you just have 8 people in a room and they're like, we're gonna go here, we're gonna do this, and that's what we're gonna take, and here's what could go wrong, and then a different thing goes wrong, and then they explain that, and then there's kablamo, kablamo, cars drive in circles. God, it is very boring to watch movies where it's just cars in circles.
Yeah, for as like quote unquote action packed as a car chase is supposed to be, it's oftentimes overwrought and overdone. I mean, what's that movie? Bullet with Steve McQueen. That one is solid. But
It's on the line.
it's been done a million times, and
Bullet and Ronin, those two, and French Connection. I would say those three are the line for me. And if you have anything worse than that in terms of car chase action scenes, or more than what's in those, you probably made an unwatchable pile of trash.
yes, an unwatchable pile of gears and electronic parts.
Just right.
At any rate,
Let's just talk about the Fast and the Furious franchise. Screw this Kubrick guy.
family. Let's blow $1 billion on production for Vin Diesel and what's that? Ludicrous to blow their loads all over cars and jumping across canyons to punch the Rock in the face. Okay, not sure how we got onto the Fast and the Furious, but getting back to did did we make it to Paths of Glory yet, or were we still talking about the killing?
Yeah, let's just skip the beginning of his career. We'll go to Paths of Glory.
Did you are you being facetious or?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not.
Okay, because obviously I'd like to watch the killing, but I didn't realize it was a real movie.
Well, it doesn't help that he has a movie called The Killer's Kiss, which is not a real movie. Like, literally not worth watching.
Yeah, I think I had always gotten confused by them. Um,
Plus, like, something to note, just about the history of like the film studios in general, is they do go in periods of like boom and bust in terms of both profitability and quality of output. Currently, we're in a big bust, and it's unclear if it'll recover just because of changes in technology and attention span and interest, etc. But like the 50s were a particular low point in American film for a variety of reasons. Uh, the primary being that the the political climate at the time necessitated that they purge the Marxists. So they basically blacklisted a bunch of artists because they were maybe communist.
Right.
Most of them were not. Uh, but the output remained the same. So you essentially took like 20 to 30% of all the people making movies and removed them from the system and then said, we've got a profit quota to reach. So they kept shitting out bad movies year after year, which is not so dissimilar from the film industry today. But it has less to do with blacklisting people and more to do with just an increased output without necessarily putting in the same number of quality filmmakers and artists in the place. So the 50s, and I only bring that up because it's like, you would have a quality director in the 50s who made 4 good movies, and if they made 4 good ones, it probably means they made a dozen bad ones. And there are a
Yeah.
few examples contrary to that, but by and large, that's just how it went. If you were a studio director, then you crapped out a movie every year and you hoped that some were good. So yeah, Paths of Glory.
Yeah, it's a nice war movie that is anti-war as well, which I mean, there obviously were anti-war movies coming out around this time, but not as many as, propaganda for war. Um, I think this is also part of a movement that is reflective of World War One and World War Two, and trying to take what happened and not and like argue against it in some ways. Um, but I think this is also an important place to start with the fact that Kubrick's movies are grounded in novels almost all of the time. Like he is not typically developing his own unique screenplay. Some of some of his movies are like derivatives of other works, but this one is based on a novel. I just wanted to sort of mention that he was much more interested in creating something that's based in a work that's pre-existing as opposed to inventing his own, which we've talked about off camera, but I think that's an interesting concept or like an interesting idea for him to attempt instead of he basically knew his own limitations in some way.
Quote by Kubrick. He always said it was better to adapt a book rather than write an original screenplay, and that you should choose a work that isn't a masterpiece so you can improve on it.
Yeah. So that completely illustrates my meandering thoughts on that. But um,
Well, he also said that he wanted to make films that would appeal to every sort of viewer, whatever their expectation of film, which is just wildly inaccurate. Just not what he tried to do at all. So,
I
this
was
guy's a
gonna say
goddamn liar.
that's not quite exactly what ended up what his career ended up being, but that's I think we're better for it, as opposed to if he was just trying to make things that people would be interested in. But
He also
um,
said this is all a part of one paragraph of shit that he said. Like, he believed audiences were attracted to enigmas and allegories and did not like films which everything was spelled out clearly. Just completely wrong, Stanley. You whiffed on all that shit. You just strike out.
that was a very hopeful quote. But you know, as we're seeing with what movies are top grossing, it's not the Enigma ones.
Believe me, it was worse in the 50s. It can always get worse. Don't forget. It can always get worse.
Yeah. So anyway, Paths of Glory, where we keep getting distracted from off all sorts of different paths, but
I'm
um,
I'm focused.
oh, Oh, okay. It's yeah, like I said, it's an anti-war movie that masquerades as a war movie, I would say. But the very last, I think it's the very last scene, clearly spells out that it is anti-war and pro like human and pro community. I would say that's like a lasting message from the movie.
Well, it's a very specific critique of war. Like, it isn't necessarily in the like war is hell camp that he would eventually go on to explore. It's more about like criticizing chain of command and where legitimacy and authority comes from in war, and how sorting that out, even with high level conversations between high ranking officers, like the chain of command doesn't really protect the lives of the soldiers. And so ultimately, war is rarely about capturing ground or saving lives. It's about something far more arcane, which is the abuse of power. At least that's kind of what I think the movie's about. But it does have, like, in my opinion, the best depiction of trench warfare from World War One I've ever seen in film, and a lot of the more modern World War One adaptations just pale in comparison, either because they focus too heavily on action or too heavily on like the sort of banal nature of people waiting in trenches, and then the heightened reality of explosions and fights that would occur around them. Because the breakdown of the movies, the first like third actually takes place in trench warfare, and the rest of it is kind of like a courtroom drama, proving whether or not these soldiers are guilty of desertion or treason or whatever they end up being charged with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good summation of it. I have I've had discussions with students a number of times about how they can't watch black and white movies, and I try to approach reaching like some level of argument with them, but like there are so many black and white movies that came before their time that are worth watching, and once you get past like a limit of medium, I think the same argument can be said for like, well, I just can't watch a movie that's in a different language other than English. It's like, well, then you're missing out on like an entire category of movies. So if you want to have an open mind and you want to explore art fully, then you need to stop putting limits on yourself for just black and white. Like you need to like push past that weak point in your own mind. Um, that's just something that I hear from the younger generation is that I don't know, there's something that turns their brain off about black and white movies, but it's the same as anything. The more the more you become exposed to something, the more like familiar it becomes and the more you can engage with it. So I think you just have to consume more black and white and get used to it.
Yeah, I mean, different strokes for different folks to some extent. Like, the thing that usually makes my eyes glaze over when I'm watching a movie is a sequence of more than like 1 minute of just pure CGI, like color bomb flashes of action. Because to me, they all look the same, which I'm sure for a younger generation is true of black and white films, that they all look the same. Because to them, the thing they're accustomed to is just a menagerie of colors and blast them, get the show. It's basically eye candy
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to black and white, which just strips all of that out of it. And so, the criticism I would give of films from like the 50s backwards, at least of the sound era, is that like actors and actresses all speak in the same voice, but by and large, as a generalization, they speak in the same voice, they have the same tone, very similar cadences, and that can make the movies feel the same. And since there's no color difference, people just throw it all into one bucket and say it's all boring, it all sucks.
Ah, when the troops were going across the sea. Ah, say?
Same. Yeah, but obviously I agree with you. You know, it being in color or black and white doesn't really matter, but I suppose it depends on what you're looking for in cinematography. Like I think when you ask the average person what is like good cinematography versus great versus perfect, you won't really see that much of a slider between good and perfect. For them, it's just like, does it look nice?
Yes.
And so, like an underwater video of a coral reef, the Great Barrier Reef or something, is like to them the peak of cinematography. Whereas for me, a boring, like standard zoom back or trolley shot from Kubrick is perfect cinematography. So it's,
Yeah.
you know,
It
I
does.
guess it depends what you're looking for.
Right. It does get back to the subject of subjectivity, but um,
Yeah, like to me, it's you just throw a steady cam on a trolley and follow a kid around on a tricycle like The Shining. That peak filmmaking. For other people, it's buildings falling over on a computer. I digress.
pure cinema.
I got nothing else about Paths of Glory. It's a great movie. It is black and white. The photography is top notch. I guess to define why, like how I would describe the main difference between color versus black and white filmmaking is black and white filmmaking obviously highlights the photography, the cinematography, and so composition becomes more important uh, within shot selection, shot length, and then gradient. Most of that is lost in color filmmaking, which is why I think by and large now movies are perhaps worse than they would have been then because the decisions of the photographer and the cinematographer don't matter because everything is passed through in post production 100 times
Yeah.
to the point where all of the choices that were made in terms of shot selection, length, color gradient, and lighting is just completely ground down and rounded out by a computer. Maybe it's not better or worse. It just to me, like the art of photography in modern filmmaking is very, very different and I would argue less craft based, less skill based.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on your DP as well. Like, if you don't have Roger Deakins on your movie, then most likely your movie is going to struggle in that regard, or just going to be like some pastiche of color. Yeah, I don't have anything more to say about Paths of Glory either. I do very much enjoy this movie. I remember we watched it together and it really blew me away. I thought it was going to be good. And it was good. And then there was that scene that really brings it all together, which makes it great in my opinion. Spartacus. So Paths of Glory is 1957. Spartacus comes out in 1960. This movie is quite long, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. 3 hours, 20 minutes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, also starring Kirk Douglas. Um, I mean, it is. You could say it's a war movie. It's definitely war based. Um, but yeah, I think that this and Paths of Glory, there's like an inflection point here, as you said, just with him sort of realizing what he could do for movies and like what projects he was like more interested in making, because it's not like this is a bad movie. Like this movie's solid. um I'm just like a lot more interested in his other movies.
Yeah, I mean this is the one that I would attribute most of my criticism with regards to it being a more standard studio picture than anything else.
Yeah, definitely.
He didn't really have a hand in writing it. he was basically just told what to do by producers. There were very frequent, long, like for the length of shooting the entire thing, fights between the star Kirk Douglas and Kubrick. Uh, Kubrick was not originally slated to be the director on the film, and he was only chosen over the existing director because Kirk Douglas wanted to work with someone he'd worked with before successfully, and obviously Kirk Douglas is the star of Paths of Glory. And yeah, I don't think you necessarily see that in the final output. There was like a lot of conflict happening behind the scenes. But by and large, as a piece of art, this is kind of just like a lot of people working together to make something bigger than themselves. And I would say it works. It's just like a big historical epic. The story doesn't really do anything for me. I'm not personally a huge fan of this movie.
Yeah.
Typically, when a movie surpasses 3 hours, it either becomes like instant classic because all the attention to detail has been paid and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But in this case, this is one that is just like, like that. The ending is memorable enough, but not so different from like any other epic I've seen that would make me want to rewatch this. I'll probably never watch this again.
Yeah, I saw this once, and that's enough for me. It's worth watching, I would say, but apparently this is the only film that Kubrick did not have complete artistic control, which you can clearly see as well. In addition to that, Dalton Trumbo, the screenwriter for it, was blacklisted at the time, because, as you were talking about, the communists. He was allegedly communist. So
yeah, he wasn't. He just wasn't a communist.
Right.
He's just a good writer that had progressive friends, and that was bad back then.
Yeah, he was part of the Hollywood 10, Hollywood blacklist.
Yeah, 60s were a bad period of film history.
Anyway,
in America.
Anyway, moving on to his next one, Child Love, a really great fun topic to discuss in the form of Lolita, a book by Vladimir Nabokov, notorious writer Vladimir Nabokov, controversial because of this. What?
Never heard of any of these things before.
Controversial? Lolita?
Nabokov, a legendary writer, all-time great.
Yes, but also wrote a book about old man getting with girl.
He's Russian. It's different over there.
Yeah, I guess. And anyway, this movie is tackling that subject. Came out in 1962. It's called Lolita. Basically, a professor stays in an apartment. He's renting an apartment from some lady and falls in love with her daughter, who is allegedly 17 in the movie. I have never seen it. I've heard that the book is good, but I haven't yet taken the plunge to read it. I assume you've seen it.
Yeah. I've seen it and read the book.
You're a bad person.
Why?
You're supporting badness. Bad.
I mean, me watching it didn't give any money to anyone involved in it because they were all dead.
No, I know.
They all had been dead for decades.
I've had students who like, I will give them like a list, like an AP list of books, and like Lolita is on there as one to read just because obviously, like, it's just a great piece of literature because it comes from Nabokov. And I have had students who are reading it and like have had discussions with me, and I'm like, yeah, I haven't read it. They're like, honestly, it's pretty great. Um, but yeah, it's clearly controversial just because of the subject matter. But Kubrick enjoys controversial subjects and like definitely leans more into them just because I think he wants to push he wants to push conversation, and he wants to push ideas of the human experience, I would say, and challenge people's beliefs. And obviously this story does. Like, obviously the story is more than just old man getting with young girl. Like, there's much more to it, despite me having never read it. I don't know if you have too much more to say about it. I'm sure I'll sit down and read it at some point.
Um, yeah, I mean, it highlights one of Kubrick's strengths as a filmmaker when it comes to character work, which is being able to try to portray a character that is like just obviously morally corrupt objectively, especially when they're just a fucking pedophile.
Yeah.
Um, the movie is less pedophilia than the book, I guess I'd say. Um, in terms of film style, there's nothing too remarkable about this movie. It is kind of shot by the numbers. There's not much about the visual style. I remember that it makes it stand out. It is something where I think it's more remembered just because it's a controversial subject matter as opposed to it being a particularly well-made film.
Yeah.
It's a pretty difficult book to adapt, regardless of the subject matter. The story is just kind of hard to tell. And it does that well enough that it's like a pretty good movie.
Gotcha.
I think part of the problem is James Mason's the lead in the movie, the pedo himself. It's not that he doesn't play the role perfectly well, but you can tell that he has some sort of contempt for the character.
Mm.
And I think that takes you out of it in a way that the book doesn't have any ambiguity. Like the character of whatever his name is, it's like Hubert
Humbert.
Humphreys or something. Yeah,
Humbert.
it's not even his real name, but the book and the movie are pretty different. It's definitely worth a watch. But yeah, it would only be the tip of the iceberg when it came to Kubrick. Poking into areas of the subconscious that in the audience are not comfortable, uh, and yeah, just generating controversy, seemingly for the sake of generating controversy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know how he chose to make this film over any other.
Was the movie a success? Like,
Yeah,
did
I
it
think
gross?
it paid a small profit by what I can see.
Oh shit, yeah, it made like 7 mil in 1962, which is pretty good for a studio. Cool. Yeah. Do we want to finally get into the heavy hitters, if you will?
Yeah, I mean that like what we've gone through there is pretty much Kubrick's rise as a filmmaker, and so by the time Lolita was completed, he had proven that he could make a period piece, historic epics, war films, you know, more serious dramas. Like he proved he could work within this studio system successfully enough, the wide range of actors and controversial subject matter. And so I think he was given a little bit more free reign, which would begin his ascent to goathood,
Yeah.
insanity.
Goatdom. However you want to express it.
Sheer madness.
Speaking of which, Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 1964.
Yeah, probably my favorite or second favorite comedy ever. This one gets me going.
Listen, if you need help or assistance to watch a black and white movie, just sit your ass down and watch this one.
It's not very long. It's perfect length, hour and a half. Very funny, pretty much the entire way through. Not what you would expect, and it does do what it does what the title tells you it'll do. So, perfect.
Yeah, it is once you realize that it's a comedy, obviously it makes it that much more enjoyable, but goddamn, it's just so rewatchable as well. Especially like you said, because of the length of the movie as well. That definitely makes it that much more rewatchable. But also like the actors in it are all perfectly chosen. The writing is top notch. Uh Extremely clearly anti-war, anti-nuke, anti-war. It's pretty hard to get that one twisted, but people are dumb, so they do get it twisted quite frequently. I was fortunate enough to have a high school social studies teacher who is a big fan, big anti-war fan as well, um, who showed this movie in class, and it was quite an experience in school. I think this movie should be taught in all schools, personally, but
Yeah, I mean, like, what do you think the primary message of the film is?
people are dumb, and given a giant weapon such as nukes, they will fire them off. Like that, if we have these big toys, which is what people see them as, instead of weapons that can just annihilate one another, um, they're like, we got to get more toys so we can fight the bad guys, and the bad guys are going to also get bigger toys, so we got to get more toys, and we got to get bigger, badder toys so we can fight the bad guys, until eventually it leads to our demise over something as simple as a misconception or miscommunication or ego chow, basically.
Precious bodily fluids.
I don't remember that part, but is that
That's the cornerstone. That's the groundwork of the film. That's the most important part.
is that George C. Scott,
No, that's Sterling Hayden.
the general guy?
He is a general, yeah.
Who's the guy that locks himself up?
Sterling Hayden,
Yeah.
aka Jack Ripper. I mean, the plot of the movie is basically that one general at a military base that has nuclear bombs goes rogue and basically has lost his mind, thinking that the Russians fluoridated the water and that his precious bodily fluids have been polluted. Because it's essentially heavily implied that he's just gay and his time in the closet for too long while a military commander has driven him mad, and so he like sets upon launching a mission to nuke Russia, and the chain of command back in Washington is unable to recall all of the planes, and so it ends with that
Yeah.
behind Reese, where yeah, the bomb gets stuck in the plane, so the guy with the cowboy hat has to unlock it manually and then rides it into the ground. But for me, the movie has always symbolized how ultimately we are all powerless in the face of a military with world destroying weapons, and how you really shouldn't worry about it because, like, nothing we will do will have any bearing on whether or not the world is annihilated by weapons we cannot control or fundamentally understand.
Yeah, which is quite a deep message from a dark comedy. I would say that people simply just watch and laugh along to. Like there is great value in the movie. Like that's sort of the it's not even the bit that it's going for. That's the deep underlying message from all of the bits in the movie, which makes it so enduring. I mean, like Oppenheimer just came out last summer, or 2 summers ago, whenever that the hell that was.
Mm,
Like
yeah, same,
like
basically the same movie, except
these
it required twice the runtime to do half as much work.
yes, like these
It
topics aren't going away. They're becoming more and more relevant. And like you said, I think it brings up the fact that I don't know. I don't fall into hopelessness um in the face of nuclear weapons just because like you said, like I don't know, what are you going to do?
I mean, the film also, like, point points out the inherent problems of the military in uh its exclusion of gay people, which, which is why there's so many implications that that general that lost his mind was just gay, as opposed to the other general who is just like hilariously straight. Like, he opens the movie with him like having his face in a lady's tits, and that's when he gets called to the situation room, and he's like, "God damn it, I just wanted to fuck."
Yeah, George C. Scott.
Yeah. I mean, it also calls out the U.S. military for just collaborating with Nazi scientists.
Oops.
That's our bad that we did that repeatedly. And
Yeah.
obviously, the standout of the film we haven't even mentioned is Peter Sellers, who plays multiple roles. He plays the president and the Nazi scientist, Dr. Strangelove, and the guy who has to go and talk down the crazy commander. Every scene he's in is just pure gold. He's hilarious.
I forgot he was three characters. I forgot he was the president as well.
Yeah. Yeah, he plays the straight man and the incompetent president and the laugh out loud Nazi scientist for which the film is named.
You know that guy who's casually in Pink Panther with David Niven. You know,
I
just
feel I can walk.
his arm goes. No, 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 nine,
Yeah,
nine.
he has the one of the best jokes which builds up through the film is that when he starts talking about like nuclear annihilation and war and his Nazi plans, his arm starts to raise up like a boner. And so he has to like hold his arm down as it causes him to become more and more invigorated, which culminates in
Engorged
him like standing out of the wheelchair he's been the whole film and doing the evil salute and
with
just
with
saying,
clapping his shoes
"Yeah,
together. As we said before, the meme pure cinema.
yeah, I
I have a
mean,
student who loves saying that every time I build up to something in class, and I can't tell if he's doing it as a bit or making fun of me. It
it's
seems,
probably both."
yeah, it seems like it's both, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
I mean, the end of this movie is perfect. Just having the bomb go off and then a montage of explosions with the song "We'll Meet Again" playing over them, just ominously signifying that humanity is doomed and that it's probably just best to laugh about it because you will have no role in whether or not we doom ourselves.
Yep. Yeah, and it's a series. I mean, we did say this, but it's a series of mistakes by multiple people who then the people who are in who are in the roles to make sure that the nuke is dropped, they follow protocol to a T. Like every single person is like, no, we got to make sure this is dropped. We got to ensure this. Oh, the plane malfunctioned. You got to get out there and just drop it. All right, got it.
Yeah, it's a perfected, evolved form of paths of glory when identifying and describing what the effective chain of command has on warfare, especially when you compare the Cold War to World War One, because World War One was simple. It was just tell your men to kill themselves over the trench lines, as opposed to how do we stop nuclear arms which are already deployed in the field from being used.
Yeah, and it employs those great and terrifying maps of all of the nuclear warheads being like launched across the oceans at various nations.
Mein Shaft.
Yeah, I think we can move on from this one. Strong recommend, especially because you'll want to watch it again. Speaking of which, 2001: A Space Odyssey, a movie that came out in 1968, which has been heralded by many, many, many people as one of the greatest movies ever made. Um, Despite it not spoon feeding you what it is about, um, which is a good thing. But I mean, for as good of a movie this one is and as enduring it is, it also has inspired how many like ripoffs of it. Like
I
not
mean,
only
it's
just from
so
scenes.
popular that it is become culturally ubiquitous.
Yeah. And people understand what it is without even having, like they understand scenes from it without ever having seen it. I mean, it's been done in what, like Toy Story, Barbie, like all over the place.
Yeah, the fact that Barbie pays homage to it, I don't even know how to describe it, is, I suppose, one of many factors that point to its enduring nature as a classic work of cinema.
Hmm. But anyway, the movie was inspired by several different short stories actually. Um, Primarily from the Sentinel and Encounter in the Dawn, which both were short stories from 1951 and 1953, which I did not know going into discussing this. Just figured I would mention that. Why are you making that pained face?
Just thought it was a book. I had no idea it was just some short
No.
stories.
Uh, I th- I don't think it was a book. Where do you want to start talking about this one? Because there are all sorts of different places we can try to go.
Uh,
Like we could start with music, we could start with shots, could start with plot, character,
I definitely
lack
have
thereof.
nothing to say about the plot of the movie.
Okay.
Uh,
That's fair.
Shit floats in space. 10 out of 10. This movie is frequently criticized for its slow pace, which is foolish because there are much slower science fiction movies. But
The only
uh,
response I have is to get good. Just just get better attention span. Have patience. If you want to do anything with art, you better challenge your patience.
yeah, I don't really know where to go with this one. Um, I don't think I really have much to say about it. I mean, it's a perfect movie. It is enduring. The themes it discusses, like Doctor Strangelove, are relevant today. Um, when it comes to space travel and its effect on our society. I mean, this came out uh, how long after the moon landing?
How long after?
Hmm.
Well, it was made in 68, so it was before. Oh, you mean the moon landing, not when we put people on the moon. Um, I think because I thought we landed on the moon in 1969, allegedly.
Did we ever land on the moon?
Allegedly.
That's what I'm driving at. This is where we finally get to start getting into the conspiracy theories about Stanley Kubrick
With
because
Carl Zeiss,
turns out
the
we never
NASA
went to the
cameras.
moon and Kubrick faked the entire thing.
Oh God,
And that's
we're gonna have to put some disclaimers on this episode now.
that's what the Shining is about, is Kubrick's admittance that he faked the moon landing. And then when the CIA tried to silence him, he made Eyes Wide Shut, which is about how CIA runs pedophile islands with Jeffrey Epstein, and then they killed him.
Then they killed that poor man.
And they heart attack gunned him.
All right, back on point here. For the shots in this, Kubrick employed special lenses from NASA, actually, which were developed by Carl Zeiss, which always fascinated me. Um, and I believe this is the first time he used them for filmmaking. I'm pretty sure.
I didn't even know he used Zeiss lenses on this.
Oh, most definitely.
I didn't even know Zeiss lenses existed then. I was under the impression that he used them later. Like they did all of that for Barry Lyndon.
Maybe it was. Maybe it was for Barry Lyndon. Yeah, no, it was for Barry Lyndon. I misspoke. It's my bad. 6 years later, 7 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything about this production wise was pretty conventional. It was just the ideas that were really unconventional. It was a perfect collaboration between Kubrick's visual style and Arthur C. Clarke's like science fiction ideas, which culminated in an examination of like artificial intelligence, our role in the universe as spacefarers, uh, man's reach exceeding his grasp, or vice versa, our failure to understand the unknown, evolution.
Yeah, as well as like what life is in the span of one lifetime.
Yeah, the ending of this movie is ill-defined. So you'll find a lot of people have very different interpretations of the end of the film.
Hmm.
Um, just another aspect that makes it pretty enduring because when you have there's like sort of hard versus soft sci-fi, like stuff that is hard science fiction, like it is fictitious as opposed to soft, where it's like there isn't much about it that is not rooted in reality. And this jumps between the two. Obviously, how the infamous AI in it, um, is something we've not even come close to creating a self-thinking computer machine. Uh, but when it comes to space exploration, we have not achieved much of anything. We've gone to the moon. We've shot a bunch of like satellites and things into space, but as for manned missions, it's not like we've gone anywhere. Um, so maybe this is a prediction of things to come, but considering that 2001 was more than 20 years ago, we've really made little advancement in the exploration of manned space. Uh, yeah, we're not going to turn into a fetus just yet. We've not hit the evolution point, because I think that's kind of the film's thesis, is that uh, man's exploration of space will begin his next evolution forward in conjunction with technology like artificial intelligence. And from what we've seen of where we seem to stand in history, we've made literally zero evolution towards transcending the travel of space time.
Yeah.
And artificial intelligence has not grown anywhere near as intelligent as, something like this would have us believe. Instead, it just monitors our time and behavior and makes sure that we stay good little happy prisoners.
Yeah. There's another point that I think is worth bringing up in the conversation of art, as well as just the best art makers, which is that your art. I forget who this quote is attributed to, but it's something like, if your art is like controversial, or if critics are kind of like split on your art, I think your art is doing like good. Like your art is pushing boundaries. It shouldn't be something that everyone necessarily loves. I think that just means that it's in line with, the zeitgeist. It's in line with what people view as entertaining or fun or enjoyable, right? So just the pure fact that just because you have something that's divisive doesn't make it necessarily good, but it at least means that you're trying new things, right? And it doesn't work for everyone, and I don't necessarily think that your art should work for everyone. And I think that this piece is a clear demonstration of that.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know. I don't know what a lot of the contemporary criticism of the film would have been. Uh, Perhaps that the film was kind of aimless, but
Right. But also, who gives a shit?
yeah, I mean, so we haven't really talked too much about the plots of these films, but this is one that I think embodies a lot of Kubrick's protagonists really well, which is uh, these sort of ambitious people who fail to achieve what they want, because that's certainly exemplified by a lot of the other films that we've covered so far, just to a lesser extent, and certainly is true of all the ones we'll talk about after this.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, what the end of the movie is just, you really have to find your own interpretation for it. There is no clear answer um necessarily that you're supposed to get out of it.
Yeah, it's not a direct one for one allegory, which personally I enjoy, because it is quite complex and difficult to interpret, which doesn't necessarily make it good, but I think because you can actually engage with it and you can like kind of work your way backwards in order to try to assert your own understanding of it, I think that's what makes it good and makes it valuable, is because it does mesh with all of these other ideas and motifs throughout the film, that you can kind of like run it through all sorts of different filters and come up with different sort of statements that the movie is making with that ending, which is one of the reasons why it's been so enduring and such an iconic film.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it's difficult to interpret as much as it is just like difficult to interpret implies that there's like a lot of information that you need to piece together. This is just like a lot of color followed by a fetus.
That's very challenging for the average American mind.
Well, maybe that's where the problem is.
Why is there so much color? What am I supposed to look at? Why is it doing this for so long?
Either way, this movie would be a perfect primer for the average American to expect spacefaring, which, like you said, would happen a year later, allegedly. And for stuff like Star Wars, which was only 10 years away, which was, you could either argue, the birth of a new type of filmmaking or the end of film as an art.
I think here's a perfect quote that captures the feeling of the end and also just of Kubrick in general, which is a direct quote from him. The feel of the experience is the important thing, not the ability to verbalize or analyze it. Which I would also say David Lynch definitely would agree with that.
I mean, it doesn't help that Kubrick was repeatedly asked what the movie meant and was like, "Don't ask me that because it'll ruin. There will no longer be an interpretation."
Yeah.
I think his best response to that was, he said, "How much would we appreciate the Mona Lisa today if Leonardo had written at the bottom of the canvas, 'This lady is smiling slightly because she has rotten teeth or because she's hiding a secret from her lover.' It would shut off the viewer's appreciation and shackle him to a reality other than his own. I don't want that to happen to 2001." Which is a shame because there is a one-time recorded interview where Kubrick does just directly explain what happens in the movie, and let me tell you what, it's hard to see the ending as any other way once you know. So
Yeah.
don't look that up because it'll then you know your reality will be shackled.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of explaining it. Reality being shackled. It's
Alien Zoo.
once you have that answer, you can't unknow. You can't unknow it and you can't unsee it. Which takes away from the magic, I would say. The magic being that you are engaging with it on like a more intellectual and like feeling and emotion based platform in order for you to like get something out of it.
Whereas you
Whereas
it's anti-intellectual. It's meant to be completely subconscious.
no,
It's
but
the
I'm
way
saying
that you
like
intellectualize it that strips it from its reality.
yeah, but I'm saying that like you sitting and thinking about it. That's what I'm talking about, intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
Like not to the point where you're like necessarily picking it apart in like an entire 25-page essay. That's not what I mean.
I gotcha.
I think this is a good opportunity to take a break and then we'll keep going. I have to go to the bathroom.
That's fine.
You could keep talking. I'll be right back.
No, no, no.
All right.
Where's the stop button? Hit.
All right. Well, this boots up like Hal. Yeah, like we said, definitely
What's
recommend 2001:
what's
Space
wrong,
Odyssey.
Dave?
What's wrong, Dave? What's wrong?
I can't let you do that, Dave.
1971,
I
A
like
Clockwork Orange, by Stanley Kubrick comes out, and this one quite a ride. Also based on a novel. It's one of my favorite novels as far as like an experience goes. Just because of the language that it uses. I think it's also quite a misunderstood story, like plot and character wise, which I think is one of the reasons why Kubrick was so interested in filming this story and doing it is because of not necessarily it's because it's misunderstood, but because it's I don't want to say controversial. I feel like controversial is just it doesn't quite capture what I'm going for. But we kind of talked about this with the oh man, what was that one? Edgelord Protagonist. Yeah, that just just referring back to that one for the main character Alex in this one, who loves killing, loves
for violence.
yeah, killing, raping, You know,
Just
all
he's a fun-loving guy.
basically just turn the dial of male aggression up to 11 and put it into a teenager, and that's who Alex is, as a protagonist. And I think the value in the movie is not obviously, um, having Alex be someone that a character, or sorry, that a person wants to be. I think as a male teenager, I think a lot of males are attracted to this sort of like edgy guy who participates in all of these like machismo sort of characteristics. But the film and the book are quite clearly fighting against that, in a satirical fashion. But satire can be difficult for people to understand.
Yeah, and it is difficult to call this a satire because it is quite serious and has some extreme depictions of violence, particularly sexual violence.
Yeah, which I understand, um, is quite alarming as well.
Yeah, and
Especially the juxtaposition that like artistically was chosen in this movie.
yeah, singing in the rain over a violent rape is brutal
Yes.
and is obviously part of why this is such an infamous movie because Singing in the Rain is a beloved classic of American cinema that has to do with, by and large, uh, that Singing in the Rain, the song, is about, staying positive even when things aren't going well. The movie has slightly different messaging, but, you know, to take that idea and just put it in the worst possible scenario, short of, murder, it's a lot. But yeah,
Yes.
I don't really know where to start with this one. I guess where I'll start is backtracking to something you touched on, which is like um Kubrick's attachment to controversy, which I would argue, like picking Lolita, the book was called unfilmable, partially
Hmm.
because of the way the narrative flows chronologically, but also because the audience is being forced to empathize with a pedophile, which is that's a tall ask. And so, 2001 is, how do we make something that is completely unreplicable? Just a space epic about like the transcendence of time and space. And then you go all the way back to a dystopian future about fun loving gangsters in a world that we hopefully never live in. Uh, and then like sort of the role of political ideology in trying to create law and order over a lawless world, specifically over the protagonist, Alex.
Hmm.
You, I know, like this book um, quite a lot. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
like your favorite novel.
It
Um,
it depends on the month and the year. I would say I definitely have, I don't want to use the word evolved because that's extremely pretentious, but um sort of moved away from it, I would say, just because I mean, one, I'm more interested in like other things. But also I think that uh actually the book that I personally wrote explores a lot of those same um themes, as the story. So one of the reasons why I find the story itself so enduring is because I think it challenges what a lot of like male values are in society. Like what does it mean to be a strong male, and also like showing the inverse of that, like how society is supposed to then keep people in check, as opposed to, you know, going and killing, going and raping, going and like doing all of these things, which obviously are bad. Um, but having a character who is challenging that, and then society essentially completely destroys that person and tries to remove the character's ability to want to do those things, um, I think is challenging human conditions in a lot of ways. And I personally am very interested in examining the human condition, on the whole, just various aspects of the human condition. So in college, when I first started reading it, like for me, the language experience alone is the thing that ultimately made me change my major, from being pre-physical therapy to being English and education. And I think that the book itself, I didn't really quite grasp it consciously at the time, but I think somewhere in my subconscious, I realized just how powerful of a tool, um, a book could be for teaching someone, these values through the lens of like a satire, and through the lens of a very compelling character who you do not like, right? But at the same time, who it has this sort of like allure to them, because he is doing all of these things that like are completely illicit, but you just want to know what happens to them. Like, well, how is this world going to respond to this completely detestable and not really human, character? Like I said, that's turning up all of these ultra violent, tendencies. Um, so basically, like, long story short, I think that Alex's character takes a lot of those values from, um, teenage men, and really ramps them up. And I think there's great value in examining, the dangers of those, um, tendencies, or like emotions, or however you want to describe them, right? Like male masculine toxicity, or male toxicity, basically. Um, but yeah, I mean, through my own story that I wrote, which is definitely different than A Clockwork Orange, but clearly is inspired, by numerous dystopic, stories. Because I wrote that book, I'm I feel like I kind of like worked through, this genre in particular, so I think it's extremely valuable to watch and extremely valuable to read. But now I'm like kind of more interested in moving on to something else.
All right, moving on to Barry Lyndon.
You don't want to talk about it anymore with it.
No, no, I knew what you were saying. It was just you saying, and I want to talk about something else. It's the perfect segue to be like, all right, that's it. That we got him. It's no more info needed here.
I mean, it is quite rare where I talk about something for 2 minutes on the show, but, um, yeah, the like I said, the language use alone, like having a language that's so crucial to the understanding and expression of the story, I think there's something in there that like really strikes a chord with myself. That language is power, and language has meaning, and language has feeling, and that's really what this story does, and the way that Kubrick integrated that into the story is so enduring and so classic. Um, I mean, the character of Alex, played by Malcolm Gladwell, like he just, sorry, Malcolm McDowell. I knew I was gonna fuck that up. Um, he just absolutely crushes in the movie. Super charismatic. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say other than definitely a trigger warning for the movie, but strongly recommend, um, watching. I would definitely push you to read the book before watching the movie.
Yeah, I'm a much bigger fan of the movie than the book. Um, it's not that I dislike the book. I just think the movie is perfect, whereas the book is just like a pretty good novel. Um,
It's funny too because Anthony Burgess, the author of the novel, just thinks it's like mid. He's like, I don't know why people like it so much. Like, I wrote all these other better stories, like ones that I enjoy much more. And
People don't want nothing to do with him.
yeah, but I think that it really shows um, what people are interested in like exploring these really dark topics, um, these dark aspects of humanity. And that is kind of what a Clockwork Orange is, if you will. I believe he was quoted as saying something along the lines of like the Clockwork Orange is showing um, like there's like this sort of cold, calculating like nature, um, almost like a machine within uh humans and within something as natural as an orange. I mean, the shots in this movie are spectacular with the camera movement as well, from the opening to the end.
Yeah, I mean, is I think the strange use of like Cockney English and bizarre like Russian hybrid language that Burgess invented, which is used perfectly in the movie, is like a that's like a place setting for what the movie is more about, which is essentially like this one character's battle for free will, even though what he then chooses to do with free will is just, raping and pillaging across the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then that even takes a lesser role to like the darker forces in the dystopian society that is like only hinted at in the background of the film, whereby essentially far left and far right wing ideologies are at battle with trying to figure out how to mold and force young men like Alex into a certain camp of behavior with which they should then participate in society.
Yeah, and it gets back to a very scary aspect, which is just like, all right, well, the only way to deal with a bully is to find a bigger bully. The only
Well,
way to
there,
respond to violence is to just respond in turn with violence or conditioning.
yeah, conditioning via aversion therapy or conversion therapy, which is to just overload Alex's senses with so much violence, and sexual violence that he is then cured of his violent tendencies and it makes him sick to have violent thoughts. But,
Hmm.
you know, as the film goes on, it is showed that it doesn't work. Aversion therapy has never worked. It will never work. It's the same reason prohibition will never work.
Yeah.
It's just how human psychology works. The aims of both governmental forces in the story aim to try to root out free will and essentially make Alex into an obedient robot, which fails. It only results in more violence and the amazing end of the movie where Alex, who they still think has been cured, is just having a hilarious sexual fantasy
In the snow.
and being force fed food. I'm cured, all right. Yeah, in
Yeah.
the snow.
I found the quote, by the way, from Burgess. If he can only perform good or only perform evil, then he is a clockwork orange. Meaning, he has the appearance of an organism lovely with color and juice, but is in fact only a clockwork toy to be wound up by God or the devil. It is as inhuman to be totally good as it is to be totally evil. So, like, obviously to parse out some things there, very clearly Anthony Burgess is saying that we all have parts of good and bad in us. And also to not recognize that is to just not recognize our humanity. And like we are not just clockwork toys that have like some bound fate. Like if you are, I don't want to get too religious here, but like if you completely believe that like your decisions don't matter because of fate, then like you are de-emphasizing your own decision making and your own ability to act um, in the world. And then basically you can just blame whatever that happens on God or the devil as opposed to yourself and your own agency, your own independence, and which I'm a huge proponent of just autonomy. That's one of my core beliefs as a person, and your own ability to act, good versus bad as well. Like I just think that that's like one of the biggest things that I get from the film is that you have your own power, and you choose how you use that power. Are you going to choose to use it for good or for bad? Are you going to choose to destroy someone else's life, or are you going to choose to like help someone else? And I think that this movie is a prime example of what is being shown is not what should happen very clearly. It's pushing you to challenge, like it's sort of like the inverse, I would say, of like what it is that you should be doing. Um, yeah, I mean, we could talk about this movie forever, but
Yeah, I think you've touched on a big part of it. I mean, it's clearly very averse and very critical to behavioral psychology and any sort of idea that purports to support it. Because like at the time the movie was released, psychoanalysis had become like the new vogue form of treatment for mental deficiencies. Complete failure, by the way, and still continues to be just a disastrous industry that does not help the psyche of the American mind, let alone the minds of other quote unquote developed or wealthy nations. Uh, but this movie more so has to do with, I think, breaking down a lot of the like operant behavioristic psychologists like B.F. Skinner, uh, or John Watson, because those were the two who did the most sort of experiments and big research books about conditioning, and aversion therapy. Because, like, a lot of these behavioral psychologists essentially argued that the human mind is something that can be researched and controlled, and therefore the individual can be controlled and taught to behave in a certain way. If not taught to behave that way, then forced to behave that way.
mhm.
Uh, which, you know, the movie just essentially laughs at and says, No, that's just not how people work." And I would argue it's the same type of thinking rooted here that also caused a lot of governmental testing like MK Ultra to happen, where essentially the government said, "We think we can control people's minds." And pretty much all of the research done by groups like the CIA or the KGB around the same time, or by um, psychologists like behavioral psychologists and psychological researchers, all came up with the same conclusion, which is essentially that through enough testing and conditioning, you can remove the core thoughts from an individual's mind. You can empty their mind. The problem is you cannot then put anything back into it.
Yeah,
So you can brainwash someone, but not into believing what you want. You can just remove what's already there. And that's, I think, at the core of this film. I think it's at the core of the way that you described what a Clockwork Orange is supposed to be. We're not machines. We don't have a machine inside of us that teaches us things. It's more of some sort of reptilian behavior. And I mean, that's why, you know, the horrifying picture of Alex behind you, like, this film has more in common with a horror movie than it does with most crime movies. Uh, I wouldn't necessarily call it outright scary, but I do think that it is close to just
yes,
being a horror movie.
yes,
Um,
definitely.
Especially because its general depiction of ideological people who think they should run the government this way or that way is essentially saying like this will always be the way that people think when it comes to the government and when it comes to trying to manage the everyday individual, especially when the everyday individual, as we know, is just a human being driven by, you know, lust, greed, self-fulfillment,
Here
betterment.
I go killing again. Here I go raping again. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, all in all,
The movie also is like gleeful in its violence, like in its depiction of ultra violence, which completely meshes with the book's anthematic values.
which is even more confusing because as we talked about a little bit before, that's kind of like the reading something as it is versus the reading as it is intended to be. Where reading this as is on the surface level, this is a gleeful depiction of a violent individual who doesn't learn his lesson by the end. So on the very surface level, this is just a movie about not condemning an evil man to some sort of justice, but instead saying like you can't remove the evil from man.
Yeah, and I've had discussions actually with students about it because like a couple of years ago, I remember people were asking me as an English teacher, like, "Oh, what are some of your favorite books?" And this was one that I mentioned, in addition to Gone Girl as well, which I just very much enjoyed, both from a language perspective, but also a narrative perspective, like the narrative choices in both of those stories. But I mean, that kind of gets back to Kubrick's analysis or quote. It's more about the feeling than it is about the analysis. But at any rate, this one girl was like, "Oh, like I've seen online, like if anyone says that this book or this movie is one of their favorites, run, like just run away." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean that's fair." But I also think that it is largely misunderstood for what it's trying to do, which, as we discussed, as a satirical piece, if you want to be Alex, yes, that is a problem. You should run from that person. But if you're looking at him as like sort of the inverse or the paradox of capturing all of these different characteristics of humans, specifically masculine toxicity, then um, it's a much more valuable conversation that can be had as opposed to just like, oh my god, this person who likes this movie is an absolute monster. Which, to be
Yeah,
clear,
yeah.
like definitely if someone says this is their favorite, you should definitely ask them why. Ask them why it is that they like this story so much.
Yeah, I think at some point we'll probably revisit the topic of uh, edgelord protagonists, anti-heroes, toxic masculine heroes, because as much as we talked about it, there's probably twice as many interesting characters we could add to the list. Uh,
Definitely.
and it is worth mentioning over and over again so that people are not ideologically captured by the allure of what these characters represent and instead view it purely as this is exactly what to avoid. You will be charmed by Alex the same way that you would be charmed by Patrick Batman, but you're not supposed to. Oh, sorry, Bateman. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. But you know what I mean. Like they're essentially so compelling and charming as characters, despite the fact that they are self-admittedly vapid. And then you root for them because that's what it's asking you to do. And then the next stage is you become them because you're an empty-headed idiot. And it's not the goal. The goal of this film is to not to foment unrest politically. The goal is to psychologically challenge the viewer to think about what the role of the government is in an individual's pursuit of freedom and free will.
His fucking droogies become policemen who then drown him. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
clear, it's clearly showing like what goes around comes around, but also that like the government is a literal bigger bully that is trying to psychologically and physically manipulate you at all points in time to keep you in check.
Recruiting brutal young roughs into the police, proposing debilitating and will-sapping techniques of conditioning. Oh, we've seen it all before in other countries. The thin end of the wedge. Before we know where we are, we shall have the full apparatus of totalitarianism.
Holy fuck, the thin end of the wedge. What a wild line. What is that from?
This movie.
That's just a quote in the movie.
Yeah, the guy who's in the wheelchair who gets beat up, whose wife is raped. That's a quote by him
The
after he's
author of the
captured.
book.
Yeah.
Because that is also a concept in the book, is that the author of the story A Clockwork Orange is in the story writing it, and he's the guy whose wife is raped, and he gets the shit kicked out of him.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to move on. That was a great discussion on it, but
there are two things I do want to mention before I move on. One, the score,
oh my God,
the excellent use of Beethoven and who else is in here? Like William Tell overtures used extensive. There's a great, as you said, whimsical use of music. A lot of great classical music. There's also a very alien synth score cut in between, which makes the whole thing seem very futuristic even now.
What's that whistling song that they play a number of times? Yeah, they play it over top of like some of the Nazi propaganda that they put in there. I can't think of it. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. I don't remember what it was, but the score definitely adds to it, like from a paradoxical and juxtaposition standpoint too. Because it's like showing that it's like telling you that Alex has fun with what he's doing, and meanwhile you are just supposed to be completely horrified by what's happening.
Yeah, and to move it further, that both political parties represented in the film, who each are certain that their solution for how to deal with Alex will do good, is actually just the same solution and is completely useless.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I was going to say is the actual visual imagery, which backs up a lot of those messagings about toxic masculinity, i.e. the scene where all the droogs are like outside of Alex's apartment and there's all of the like hilarious sort of Roman graffiti, which is also just covered in dicks. The way they wear those weird white cups literally around their balls and their groin, which are then used repeatedly by them to seemingly sodomize one another and force themselves on one another, and that whole series of visual moments culminates in them visiting another woman who is then literally murdered by a big ceramic penis.
Yep, they didn't rape her, they just killed her with a giant dick.
Which, yeah, it's literally shoved into the camera. The messaging could not be any clearer here. So yeah, let's move on from the big ceramic dicks.
Speaking of big ceramic dicks, let's cut to our sponsors. No, I'm just joking. I do have to mention this. I was in New York City yesterday.
New York City.
Anna and I were walking away from a Christmas market, and I just see this like tent outside of it, and I'm looking, and it looks like these are like ashtrays in like the shapes of things, and I was like, is that a vagina? Is that a pussy? And then I just hear this guy, step right up over here. We got something no other city has. This right here is one of them pussies. You gotta get you one of these. You've never seen one like this. And I was just like, holy shit, that is an ashtray pussy. And that's what they were selling.
Truly the greatest city in the world.
Yeah, just figured that was worth sharing. I hope everyone has one on their coffee table. Barry Lyndon is from 1975. Speaking of a movie with none of those on the tables. Yeah, thankfully I recently saw this one. This must be mentioned. Um, has some of the best use of natural lighting in a movie that I've seen, as well as just in general color as well. Like this movie just matches up with the every scene is a painting, right? Like the orchestration of characters, the camera movement as well, or just the camera just like holding still. There's a lot of just like still sort of wide shots as well with one point perspective. Um and God, it's just so enjoyable to even like you could probably get something out of watching this with no sound.
Oh, I mean, I think pretty much every Kubrick film past Lolita is meant to be watched on mute, and turning the sound on is just having fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is the one, the movie where he got the custom made Zeiss lenses because he just regular cameras weren't doing it, and it frustrated Kubrick. So he's like, "Hey, can you get the guys from NASA to make me cameras that work better? I can't shoot this movie with only candlelight with these stupid cameras you gave me." And they're like, so, yeah, this is probably the film that, in terms of Kubrick's influence on the form of filmmaking, has the most influence, which is weird because it is probably his least popular movie, pending the ones that are just straight up bad. Um, yeah, I mean the photography in it is bar none. Nothing really compares. Doesn't necessarily make it entertaining, which I'm sure is the most common criticism of the film, is that it is rather slow.
Oh, shut
The
up.
the scene behind you is literally 5 minutes of an extremely slow zoom with, to my knowledge, no dialogue. Um, yeah, I don't really know where to begin with Barry Lyndon. Uh, it's a masterwork. It is like the other great movies we've just discussed, not what it appears to be on the surface. Um, where do you want to start with this one? You have actually seen this one more recently than I have.
I mean, I would just start from the end and work our way backwards. Like you mentioned he's not interested in doing a movie about heroes, and like very clearly um the character does not turn into a hero. Is not a hero. And I think that's kind of like one of the biggest reasons why his movies are so enduring is because he chooses to operate outside of the typical form of having a character who is a hero and fits these conventions and everything is tied up nicely. But also he doesn't go into the very, I don't want to say easy route, but it's been done how many times, like a tragedy, right? There are elements of tragedy within his movies, but he still does things in a much different manner and leaves things more open to interpretation, I would say, at the end of his movies. um this one is not as open to interpretation, just because, I mean, it is, you could say it's a period piece. um Would you say this is his only period piece aside from like his war movies, which clearly, take place in a specific period?
No, but because of what you just said, this is what we would associate period piece as being, but that's because the definition of period piece seems to be exclusively like the 18th and 19th century in England. I don't know why that's our assumption with it, or why our fascination is specifically with that time and place. I suppose because the fashion, dress, and art of the period was so distinctive. Uh, but yeah, I mean, Spartacus is a period piece. It's just not a period drama, so to speak. And obviously, Paths of Glory, that sort of particular fascination with the art style of the period is de-emphasized. Like there are those scenes of Kirk Douglas walking through like the mansion and there's all the art along the walls and things, but that's every scene in Barry Lyndon.
Yeah.
Uh, I've talked about this with you once before, where to me Barry Lyndon is the perfect convergence of form and content leading together, where the form of the film, which is basically trying to replicate paintings of this era, becomes the story, where the protagonist is essentially at the beginning a human character in a film, and by the end just becomes a caricature of someone from these paintings. He loses his own free will. He basically copies the people around him and is willing to concede any sort of morality to get what he wants, just basically to become wealthy and do nothing, and does so by manipulating and stealing from others until by the end he's literally just a character in a painting.
Without the use of his legs.
Correct. He can't move anymore.
Yeah. His agency has been stolen because of his immense greed.
Which
Yeah,
he also willingly gives up in the duel at the end of the movie.
his riches.
Everything.
Yeah.
His one choice of basically being the bigger man betrays him.
Yeah, that's true.
Too little, too late.
The movie is a great takedown of consumerism. If you if you think about it, even just for a little, the vapidness or vapidity, whichever one you want to go with, of constantly trying to acquire wealth and nice things and live this lavish lifestyle. And also there's the idea that like the more you have, the more those things that you own will control you. The more you own, the more you will be controlled. Because like there's that scene where he and his wife are trying to like balance the checkbooks, and it's literally just like you can see like almost like a huge spider web of just how things are tied together, how they're like bleeding all of these profits, and they're trying to balance it all, and it just doesn't make sense to the point where they've they've taken on too much debt where everything is lost basically. They've gotten too big for their britches basically. Yeah, strongly recommend.
Yeah, I mean I do think this is Kubrick's most cerebral art film, and not because it is like of a painterly quality, but because of what I described before, the way in which the character takes on a meta narrative journey to essentially become a character in a painting beyond being a character in a movie, uh, which is like a perfection of craft of filmmaking that I've just never really seen before, especially in a movie that is as dry on the surface as Barry Lyndon. That being said, as you touched upon, it does just have some of the most gorgeous cinematography ever shot, partially because it is shot with revolutionary lenses and the invention of Steadicam, but also because it is all entirely natural light, which gives it a look that has just never been replicated well since. Um, we've not talked too much about pseudo adaptations or obvious allusions or references to this or other Kubrick movies. This one is the one that I think has been the most spoofed, homaged,
Yeah,
referenced.
stolen.
Uh, Yeah, Yorgos Lanthimos seems to have a very obvious love of this movie,
Yes.
which I don't know why, but I've never heard him or anyone else really talk about when examining Lanthimos's films, especially The Favorite, which shot for shot rips off 4 or 5 moments from Barry Lyndon.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I mean, and it also literally just uses the hilarious powder wigs and makeup that's just in the exact same way.
yeah, well, that's what these poofy English people did. Yeah, I've got nothing else. This is a phenomenal movie. If you've got an afternoon to kill it with this.
Definitely. Just like Barry does all those people in the duels.
Does love shooting and stabbing. Also desertion.
All right, time for The Shining. Another movie based on a book that Kubrick. What was that quote that you said at the beginning of us starting to film this? Choose a book that you can improve on, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's hilarious because The Shining, written by Stephen King, prolific author Stephen King, is a really funny author to choose a book to improve upon. Um, Much to the ire of Stephen King, honestly. He is on record as stating how much he dislikes aspects of the movie, if not the movie as a whole. But
Yeah, just hilarious given that Stephen King has basically birthed some of the worst films ever made by just writing an endless number of mediocre horror novels and then never commenting on how shitty the movies are. And then the one time that an artist comes along who is better in his own field than King is in his and improves upon his work, King, had to just jump in and be like, I did a better thing. My book about alcoholism is better than that book about the genocide of Native Americans. Anyway, Stephen King was told before the movie was made that Kubrick had his staff bring him stacks of horror books, and he planted them in his office to read them. Kubrick's secretary would hear the sound of each book hitting the wall as the director flung it into the reject pile after reading the first few pages. Finally, one day, the secretary noticed it had been a while since she heard the thud of another writer's work biting the dust. She walked in to check on her boss and found Kubrick deeply engrossed in reading a copy of The Shining.
Jesus. I actually have never read it. I've heard great things. A student recommended it to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into shitting on King too much because King is certainly a pretty good author, but The Shining is one of the better works of his I've read, uh, and quite different from the Kubrick adaptation, which at least makes it a bit more novel to read as opposed to just a very similar adaptation.
Yeah. I mean, obviously he has like great source material as well to inspire movies like Stand by Me or Shawshank Redemption or Green Mile, right? Any
Those were all short stories.
Yeah, but like I'm saying,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
from his writing, but
I'm,
um
I only mention that out of prickishness because I think it's funny that like essentially the short ones are the ones that are then well stretched out as opposed to the long ones where those are harder to bring about. Give me 1 second here. I'll be right back.
I did want to mention one funny aspect of The Shining, which is, oh, you can leave. I was going to say the Razzies, um, being nominated for the Razzies in 1981, which is like worst in like different artistic categories. So um, Kubrick received a nomination for worst director of the movie, and then Shelley Duvall was also nominated to win Worst Actress for her role in the movie, which Shelley Duvall, that nomination was rescinded because of Kubrick's alleged mistreatment of her on set. Basically, Shelley Duvall lodged complaints that he basically was a monster toward her with, I believe, like I don't know if he wouldn't let her sleep, but he also like traumatized her in a number of ways, from getting her ramped up for a specific shot, genuinely frightening her so that she was scared within the movie.
Oh, you're talking about his mistreatment of Shelley Duvall.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we haven't gone into that yet, about Kubrick's particular control over his actors on the set and his incessant need to do takes over and over again. I assume that's what you did. You go over like doing some of these takes 100 times?
No, I was building up to that,
My
but
bad.
yeah. No, it's fine. There is a great quote from him. Where was it? It was something to do with why he does the shots so often. Oh, it was really, really funny. I can't find it. It's fine. It was something to do. It was something along the lines of why he does so many takes, and he was like, "Because actors can't remember their lines. Because actors are bad." Was basically his response.
He was like rewriting the script every day for this movie, but the changes were so minute that it confused the actors and resulted in him doing what should otherwise be very simple takes over and over and over again. I think the result of Shelley's the potential destruction of Shelley Duvall's mind has been a little overblown. Obviously, that's not the way that you want to treat people.
Yeah, right.
That's, it is just a movie. It is just a work of art. It is the destruction of someone's life should not be put in front of, like obviously you shouldn't have to destroy someone just to make a movie. Uh, but like with that being said, I think it's overblown. I think Duvall was in movies after this and had recovered. It just, I think it's the worst example of Kubrick's personality and need to control people and manipulate them to get what he wanted. But the result is this great movie, and part of it is doing the takes over and over and over again was clearly to create a very, very specific rhythm. And that rhythm is seen, I think, only in this Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut. I think to a lesser extent it does exist in Barry Lyndon, but Barry Lyndon it was easier to accomplish because the actors were forced to be still more often, and to an even lesser extent, A Clockwork Orange, which has a specific rhythm, but that's accomplished by a lot of sharp cuts and a lot of montage, which this film makes less extent of. Instead, this goes for a lot of crazy tracking shots. But yeah, it is very much like a dream because of the very particular use of timing, which I suppose was necessitated on the endless number of takes.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry I had to get interrupted there. There's a
No, you're good. Just to also kind of pit what he said about Duvall against all of that. This is a quote from him on why he chose Shelley Duvall. I had seen all of her films and greatly admired her work. I think she brought an instantly believable characterization to her part. The wonderful thing about Shelley is her eccentric quality, the way she talks, moves, the way her nervous system is put together. Shelley seemed to be exactly the kind of woman who would marry someone like Jack Nicholson and be stuck with him. Yeah, he also obviously has some things to say about Jack Nicholson. On Jack Nicholson, I believe that Jack is one of the best actors in Hollywood, perhaps on par with the greatest stars of the past like Spencer Tracy and James Cagney. I should think he is on almost everyone's first choice list for any role which suits him. His work is always interesting, clearly conceived, and he has that X factor magic. Jack is, excuse me, particularly suited for roles which require intelligence. He's an intelligent and literate man, and these are qualities almost impossible to act. In The Shining, you believe he's a writer, failed or otherwise. Just figured that was worth mentioning here because, yeah, I mean, the basic plot of the movie is that writer takes family to hotel for him to write what is it? He's trying to write his like big novel, and he loses his mind.
Mm-hmm. In like 3 days.
Oh, and also it's worth mentioning that he has like a clairvoyant son.
Yeah, his son possesses a telepathic ability called the Shining, which allows him to seemingly read and control other people's minds and also to communicate with the dead. It's one of those movies where it's unclear how much of the fantasy and fantastical elements are real. But unlike some other works where it's never made entirely clear whether or not there is a fantastical magical element, the magic is just straight up real in this.
Mm-hmm.
Evidenced by Jack escaping from the like pantry room, like some magical force opens the door for him, and Danny, the son, is able to summon Scatman Carruthers back from his abode in, I think, Florida, up back to Colorado.
God, that name is just so good. Scatman Carruthers.
Mm-hmm.
Dick
Halloran.
There's a really funny and goofy documentary that goes over this, like Room 247 or whatever the hell it's called, 237.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are all sorts of grand conspiracy theories around Kubrick and this movie that are outlined in that. It's fun to explore those topics, but I don't know. I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole of conspiracies with the movie, but
yeah, I mean, similar to his other movies, I have a pretty specific take on what I think the movie is about and what it's trying to get across. But that
go for it.
No, that's my theory of The Shining is far more in depth than the other ones, and it basically is just in the same vein as the maniacs in Room 237 who are like, The Shining is an admission of guilt that he faked a moon landing.
I'd like to hear your very specific take on the movie.
The movie is it is meant to be a critique of the elite in America who have built their wealth upon the piles of dead bodies, both starting with the Native Americans,
The engines.
but ascending through the ranks of all of the wars that we have committed and the atrocities we have committed, which have allowed the wealthy of the country to amass power, and how that power and wealth built on violence psychically affects the average American's mind, which is in this case personified by Jack Nicholson's Jack Torrance, and how the madness felt by Jack Torrance is then being transferred to his son.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the psychological distress under which all Americans live, and that the illusion or delusion,
horror.
Yeah, this illusion or delusion that the American mind has to then cope with, especially when they dream up some sort of ambitious path for themselves, like being an artist or a writer, is then crippled because they're unwilling to confront these truths of the world that they live in, and it consumes them and their family. And this is essentially brought about by both one being in a place completely overrun by this psychic slaughter, aka an Indian burial ground, and B, seclusion, which is both unhealthy for the human mind and, in this case, bad for a family already under duress.
Yeah, it's a great take.
All of that is somewhat in the text. You do have to sort of recontextualize quite a few scenes to make it work, but I think it's all there. Otherwise, there are bits and pieces of the visual narrative that don't really make a lot of sense unless you find some larger narrative to try to piece them into, especially given how it's adapted from the novel in the first place and the role of Danny's like telepathic abilities, which are uh, largely left up to the interpretation of the audience, because there are parts of this movie where like you could read it as Danny knows his father is abusive towards him and his mother, and Danny manipulates his father using his telepathic abilities, and the hotel itself is not actually haunted, and Danny's only goal is to escape the hotel with his mother, which is another great reading of the film. There are
Yeah,
no ghosts. It's just
yeah,
Danny.
yeah. That's an interesting one to pursue or walk down that path.
But yeah, that I don't want to get too much in a loophole of CIA conspiracies and some of the other things about like how it was actually a subconscious way for Kubrick to get his audience to do witchcraft.
Oh boy.
So there's a lot of good ones here with
Oh my
this one.
God. Yeah. We would encourage you to, at your own leisure, look up some very funny conspiratorial messaging within this movie.
But also encourage you to do witchcraft.
Yeah, that too. Um, the movie does have like a lot of really funny elements that it intersperses into the movie that makes you just feel like something is off as well. Like the overall like layout of the hotel has like rooms that should have something else behind it, but then it's impossible where the room is located for there to be like a window for instance. Um if you actually like map out the hotel itself, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
Uh,
mapping out the hotel you see by following the camera is literally an Escher painting. It doesn't work.
Yeah, which adds to the general like unease that you have while watching it unconsciously.
Or the
And
fact that in almost every scene, Jack Nicholson at some point or another looks directly at the camera, making you feel like what you're watching is watching you.
yeah, also very true.
The
Oh,
sound design in this is top notch, just creepy, spooky.
oh my God, yeah. Gregorian chants.
Yeah, the I forget the name of it. The main melody of the soundtrack.
Hmm.
There's a name for it. Maybe I'll find it here.
But yeah, anyone who wants to dip a toe into horror, or even just watch, yeah, Kubrick's take on horror, go for it. Do you want to discuss the ending of the movie? Or no? Rather not spoil it for people.
What about it?
Like its possible meanings. Because we
Oh,
mentioned the fetus from 2001, but we talked about how that one is abstract. This one also is, but like is referencing the fact that he is like somehow trapped, like is distilled. It's like a distillation of him, like in the hotel itself
Right. Yeah, I
within
mean,
time somehow.
yeah, he was always the caretaker.
Hmm.
Correct them.
What?
Correct them. Grady tells Jack he needs to correct his family. Gotta murder him. Kill him. That's what he gets told to do. Um,
Do you want to take a break before we finish this out?
sure.
Okay. All right, back from our break, all fueled up again. Um, Time for some FMJ, some Full Metal Jacket. Um, another war slash anti-war film. Um, this one certainly a lot of people get it confused with, you know, mythologizing war, I would say, showing um glorification of war in some way, but them completely misreading it, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it suffers from a similar problem to A Clockwork Orange that, you know, there's something very iconic about it that people will obviously misinterpret as glorification as opposed to condemnation.
Yeah, I think it operates in a similar way to that, where it makes it seem alluring, but like that's in order to demonstrate how alluring this is initially, and until you like uncover and like take the mask off and then you get underneath it and you're like, oh my god, literally just raping this country and its inhabitants and killing them.
Yeah, I mean, it has a lot of similarities to A Clockwork Orange about free will and like the role of brainwashing and propaganda. It's just that in this case, the power structure that tries to brainwash people on the ground is the military as opposed to some like spooky government organization or like dogmatic ideologues the way that they are in A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Whereas this movie is like pretty cleanly split into three parts, where the first part is basic training camp, and then the second two parts are different parts of actually being in Vietnam. Um, but yeah, I think it is obviously as a piece of entertainment, comparing it to a lot of other Vietnam movies, because Vietnam, uh, anti-Vietnam, anti-war films were pretty popular pretty much once the public turned against the war in the mid to late 70s onward through until today. Um, but most of them still have some aim of entertainment value, and the ones that don't, that sort of bridge that gap, that are considered classics, I think suffer from different problems of either being too focused on entertainment, or in the case of Apocalypse Now, it does mythologize it for better or for worse. Like there is something um, almost mystical about Apocalypse Now,
Yeah.
and that detaches itself from the war in a way very differently than Full Metal Jacket attempts to detach itself from war. Because they're obviously both anti-war movies, but like Apocalypse Now is more the process of the way that a character loses his mind there, where Full Metal Jacket is just an examination of one guy who never really wants to be in the war.
Hmm. I don't have too much to say about this movie. I watched it, I enjoyed it, but it's a good movie. I think it's probably like one of my least favorite of his, but that's also just because I don't know, on some level my brain just kind of turns off with war movies. We've talked about that before. Um but that's more of a case of the subject matter itself or genre getting in the way of my own like enjoyment or sort of value that I get from it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I, for the most part, I just don't like war movies because they're typically propaganda, either very pro or anti-war propaganda, and the use of them as propaganda then um, isn't really aiming to have any deeper value beyond swaying you one way or the other on whether or not war as a whole is bad or, this one specific war was bad.
Yeah, right. Like showing like war is bad, but this specific war is even that much worse.
Yeah, yeah,
Which
because I
is
think,
what most war movies, well, not most, but most anti-war movies show.
yeah, I think this is maybe the only, like, I think when we get through Eyes Wide Shut, we'll compare some of Kubrick's films to like others in the similar genre and talk about like why his legacy or influence is lasting. Full Metal Jacket, I think, has a lot of iconic moments, but they're all in that first part in training camp. And
Hmm.
later on, the scenes are a lot more stretched out, a lot emptier, which is clearly by design. But in terms of entertainment value or lasting impact, they kind of pale in comparison to plenty of other Vietnam movies. Uh, Most notably, probably Platoon and Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting just because um critically this movie somehow seems to have outlasted a lot of his other movies. Like people, this movie is just beloved,
Hmm.
which isn't necessarily a good or a bad thing. It just is. Yeah, I would recommend watching it. That's kind of all the more that I have to say about FMJ. I'm
All
just like
right.
way more interested in his other movies, but speaking of his other movies, 12 years after, he comes out with Eyes Wide Shut. And this
Yeah, there
is,
there was a big break in between The Shining and Full Metal Jacket, and I think part of that was because Kubrick actually tried to make other films in between that failed, whereas between Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, I think there's less of a break than you'd think, and it was more that Kubrick was just not working on a movie, and then it took years to make Eyes Wide Shut.
gotcha. Yeah, I we didn't really discuss all of the sort of failed um projects. Like Barry Lyndon, he wanted to make like a Napoleon movie, but then it kind of sort of turned into Barry Lyndon because um I forget exactly what happened, if it was like a money issue or what that happened with his Napoleon movie that he wanted to make.
I think every time he tried to make it, funding fell through.
Because people were like, why the fuck would people watch a Napoleon movie?
Well, I think it's because Kubrick was like, I need 50,000 people to shoot this scene. And they're like, oh, we're not doing that.
So yeah, this is his last movie, and um, soon after the movie was released, he died
Oh,
from.
before it's released posthumously.
Oh, that's right, posthumously.
Posthumous release.
Yeah, he died of heart failure, alleged heart
No, he
failure,
was assassinated.
allegedly assassinated.
You don't make a movie about Jeffrey Epstein and then just die of a heart attack. It's no, you don't. You don't.
Yeah, we're recording this around the holidays, and this is a nice Christmas movie as well.
Yeah, family friendly. It's about family.
It's about the Illuminati, among other things. There's a lot there's a lot of fun stuff with this movie. Like the relationship between Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, Kubrick forcing them to shoot a scene like near 1,000 times over.
1,000 times.
It wasn't 1,000. It was, I think it was over 100, but yeah, just had to get the dynamic right, the movement right.
Considering there's really only one large elongated set piece in the whole movie, it is embarrassing that this project took 400 days to film. It is this one's notorious for like Tom Cruise had to just sit in the same room for 3 weeks and say the same two lines over and over. And Stanley's like, you're not getting it right. Or like the one there are not many characters in the movie. One is played by Sidney Pollack, who himself is a famous director. And there's a scene he's in where he talks with Tom Cruise for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and like it took them 3 weeks to shoot because they couldn't remember their lines. And Pollock was like, Stanley, why are we doing this? Like, I make movies. What we got the lines. Like, I know we did the scene well. Like, well, what are we waiting for? And Stanley's like, don't you want to get it right? Just blowing past him, pretending like, no, we got to get it right. Whatever Kubrick's goal was, seems like he achieved it because the film has a very particular dreamlike quality in the pace in which characters move. It's perfectly edited.
It also feels like a nightmare. Like it feels like you're the voyeur within your dream, and like similar to like Inception, whenever like all the like people in the crowd just turn and look at you, and then you're just like, oh fuck, oh my god, wake up, please wake up. It definitely has that feeling in this.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah, I mean,
also
as
it also comes out in 1999. Another perfect place for something that has to do with like the darker sort of what do you want to refer to it as, like it's not like the dark government, but like people in power, these secret organizations, just having that happen at like the turn of the century emboldens people and brings more conspiracy theories with it as well.
because of the year 1999.
Yeah, like you have like Y2K, you have like everyone either thinking that like there's just like all sorts of different, like, because it simply because the year is about to turn into like 1,000 and you're going to change the front number from 19 to 2. It's like people make a bigger deal of something than otherwise, like if it came out in 2007 or something like that. Like I'm saying that adds to sort of like the mythos of the movie as well, like, oh, this great powerful director died right before he could see the year 2000, and his last movie comes out at the turn of the 20th, or the turning of the 20th into the 21st century. Like that just like adds to that sort of like magical element of the movie itself and of the man himself. To continue sort of down like a mythological road. I might get a good screening of this soon, actually. Might try to convince Anna to watch this soon.
Seems like a good marriage-ending film.
It's a good test. It's a good test of your relationship, sure.
No, I mean, it just the filming of the movie literally ended the marriage. It's extremely unclear if Kubrick did it on purpose or not. Much of his choice of actions and reactions in life is unknown because he was not a particularly public figure, so he didn't describe why he did things. But it seems like he literally made the movie with one side project of like aim was to break up the marriage of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman by, repeatedly filming just complete porn with the two of them and then with other people, which he forced each of them to watch.
Jesus, Stanley.
Great movie, but yeah, it seems like he maybe had some sort of ulterior motive. But it's unclear. Tom Cruise is a really weird guy, so
Yes, you could say that again.
anything is possible. But yeah, it's a great movie. It's like I'm pretty sure it's billed as like an erotic thriller.
Yeah,
Not what
something
it
like
is.
that.
It's a very slow moving mystery with like a weird cult orgy in the middle.
Erotic thriller.
Yeah, it's not really an erotic thriller.
Fuck me.
That's that last line of the movie, right?
Pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of like power dynamics within here, covert operations, secret organizations. Um, shit, I lost my train of thought. I was gonna say something else about like the motivations, the motives of characters. Um, yeah, just like clandestine happenings, basically, and the inner workings of the mind. I mean, this movie does feel like sort of a cousin to American Psycho in some ways. Like American Psycho is much more focused on that one Patrick Bateman. I know you brought him up before, but it's more focused on that character. This one is kind of also more in focus of like the person within an organization and society at large.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Let's move on. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure either. Lost my train of thought with losing sight of the idea that I was going to mention. It just escaped me. But yeah, that's the final film in his filmography. Definitely gonna watch this one again soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely about, like in the way that Kubrick's other movies are, the subconscious and its impact and effect on a family. Uh, the secret basically that Tom Cruise uncovers is that there is some sort of weird sex cult run by the powerful and elite of New York City. But there's a bit more to it than that, and it is worth watching to see what you get out of it for yourself. Because just reading a plot synopsis of this movie will make it sound pretty mediocre.
That's what I was gonna say. Actually, is the power dynamics and like taking advantage of others, like below you, and then also trying to like move up in like tier is a concept within the movie, as well as trust. Like trust within the film is examined, and like who should you trust, who, and like why you should trust someone is a question that I would say is like constantly at the forefront of the movie. So we have a couple different options of how to move, like what discussion we want to have to wrap up Kubrick. Obviously, we talked off air on sort of the value of watching Kubrick's movies and like rewatching them as well from like a film study standpoint. But I guess it's up to you if you want to discuss like other directors that are also mentioned, to like sort of like stack them up against Kubrick, or like I don't know. I guess I'll just say that what we had discussed before for why we like Kubrick movies, but Kubrick in general, but also like what we get out of watching Kubrick is more that his movies are kind of like a benchmark, and also if you're going to look at another director and their body of work, right? You kind of said show me one of their movies that is better in that specific genre. And we talked about one of the reasons why Kubrick is so enduring and so incredible, and quite honestly attains the level of goatdom that you talked about, like being the greatest of all time director, which some people herald him as. Would you give him that title? The greatest director of all time?
He's one of them.
Yeah, I would certainly put him on the Mount Rushmore of directors.
It depends on what you're comparing them to. Like, it's really tough to like come up with a good scope because like the range is so skewed. Like the reason I say that is because you have international directors who dominated an industry that was smaller than Hollywood for the same amount of time as Kubrick, let's say, and they made 10 times as well. Like they made 50 movies.
Yeah.
Like you have Alfred Hitchcock, who had a 70-year career. He made like 80 feature films.
Yeah.
Akira Kurosawa made like 100 feature films. Like he made this as many masterworks as Kubrick made, Kurosawa made. And he made them in a shorter period of time. He also had some duds, and there's a bunch of guys like both of those in a lot of other countries, and they just mastered their own infrastructure of filmmaking in those countries roughly around the same time. Most of them started before Kubrick did.
Yeah,
before
like you
the
could
film
mention
industry changed.
like you could mention Bergman, probably in the same breath.
Yeah, and most would. Federico Fellini. Those are all the ones that are normally mentioned because they all had very long, very successful careers. They made a ton of movies that had enduring, lasting impact. But none of those guys are as ubiquitous, other than Hitchcock, as Kubrick, because their movies aren't in English, which is the language we speak.
Yeah.
So you're not, these are also like big movies for the most part. Like the budgets are bigger, the scopes are bigger. They're not like, the Bergman or to a lesser extent the Fellini movies that are smaller, more personal.
Yeah. But we also just discussed the fact that he also is operating in numerous genres. Like he wasn't just contained to one genre and was satisfied with sort of continuing to copy and paste in that genre. Like, yeah, you could make the argument that he kept coming back to war and anti-war, but he also, like, each of his quote unquote war movies kind of had a different take on war, or was trying to highlight different aspects of it instead of just doing the same thing using a different war, which is one of the reasons why I find those movies so interesting. But I'm also just less interested in his war movies, except for Doctor Strangelove. But um, yeah, I mean, I find great inspiration in the fact that he didn't feel contained to one genre. Like that's something as myself, as an artist, as a writer, as a future director that I also want to do. I don't, I'm like less interested in just working with one genre, and I'm more interested in just whatever story I am interested in telling at the time and the characters. That's all the more reason to do something, right? And what end goal or what end point you would like to get to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think he thought in genre. I don't think he delineated films that way.
Definitely did not. No.
But that also is what helped him to never make, like, once his career got going to the point where he had control over the projects that he did and complete control over making them, like, he didn't fall into the trap of just making like a boring generic 2.5 hour drama movie designed to win awards.
Yeah, like look at his last movie that he made.
That was the closest he came to doing that, and it was literally called Porn Upon Release, which is probably tame in every way by today's standards, but 25 years ago it certainly was not considered so.
Porn.
Yeah, it was just straight up called pornography.
Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah, because all the sex scenes,
Oh.
all the scenes where they do the sex that people didn't like. Turns out people don't like that. People say that's not good,
Hmm.
which is weird because that's the only way there are people. But what do I know? Yeah. So where do you want to go from here? You have any wrapping up thoughts? Any comparisons you want to make?
I mean, we talked off air that like if you're talking about like a prize fighter or a boxing match, like I think that he pound for pound can fight against anyone who's especially directing nowadays. Like you mentioned all of the sort of people who came before him or who were operating as directors around the same time as him, and I think he hangs with the best of them, if not just outright beats them. Um, I don't think we
Oh, the point
have.
I was making is there's really no argument to be made that he's better than any of the four guys I mentioned.
Oh, that he isn't because
Yeah,
they've
like
made
there's just
more.
yeah, because they just worked
Yeah,
in a different system than him and worked at the same level for longer, more prolifically.
yeah. The point I was making is that people who are just now getting into movies, um, I think just with any great art, right? It helps to go back. It helps to go back in the past because the same way that art, like in paintings, has all been done before, right? It's all kind of telling the same story with different mediums over and over again. That's one of the reasons why I am so drawn to film is because yeah, sure, like you have the same elements, you have characters, you have whatnot, but like it's the new inventions and it's the new ways of telling a story which are so fascinating. And you see that throughout all of Kubrick's pieces. Like the same way that you asked the question, like, okay, if you want to make the case that blah 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 director is better than Kubrick, show me one of their movies that's better than this. Tell me one of them.
You're asking me?
No, I'm saying like this is like a conversation with that you could have with someone else is that someone is claiming that so and so director is great, right? let's say David Fincher, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that someone is a huge David Fincher fan, which I'm a big David Fincher fan, but I wouldn't make the case that David Fincher is a better director or his filmography is better than Stanley Kubrick's, personally. Yes, you could still go down the rabbit hole of, oh, well, it's subjective, but like if you're matching up different movies of theirs together, I think that pound for pound Kubrick's movies are stronger, personally.
Well, Kubrick like became a system. Like Kubrick made some movies for studios, and then Kubrick became the studio. Like Kubrick then went off. He moved like between 2001 and A Clockwork Orange. He left the United States. He hated the U.S. He moved away and moved to the middle of the country in England, and then forced people to come to England to work with him because he refused to fly. He was an avid pilot, and he was like, it's not safe to fly. So he just stopped flying. He forced all these movies were shot in the UK. People came to him. So when you compare a modern day filmmaker to that, there just aren't people who do that because partially because the film industry like doesn't have such allowances for megalomaniacs like Kubrick.
Right.
There are a handful of people like that, but by and large, like it depends on the type of artist you're talking about. Like Kubrick in that way was a complete package. Like he forced creative people to come to him. He was difficult to work with, but fostered good relationships with high talented people.
For the most part.
What do you mean?
He fostered those good relationships for the most part.
Well, when the people wouldn't do what he said would, like one, he would psychologically manipulate them and ruin their mind, or just fire them. So in his mind, he was fostering a good relationship. I mean, this guy was a crazy person. Like, he was trying to make a haunted house movie about ghosts, and I imagine in his head, he's like, I'm making a movie about how America is a murderous country that killed all Native Americans. And meanwhile, the scene he's shooting is just a little kid writing murder backwards and did completely detached things. And then his real life impact was, yeah, Shelley, you're going to have to do this scene for the 98th time. My bad, but like I don't believe you're scared. You just don't look. And meanwhile, she's pulling her hair out. Like this guy was crazy. But if you compare him to a lot of the biggest, most successful, most adulated filmmakers today, they always lack in some comparison. Like David Fincher is not really a writer per se. David Fincher is a studio guy. He comes in and he makes a movie the studio wants. The difference is Fincher is such a good director that whatever the project is brought to his level. So all his movies look the same because he's like, yeah, I make movies David Fincher way. So all of his like The Social Network made by anyone else would look like a generic studio drama about the Facebook people. Instead, it's like, oh yeah, that's just another great David Fincher movie that happens to have very different content in it than all of his murder, crazy crime dramas.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's not writing his own stuff the way Kubrick did. Christopher Nolan, hugely successful, starts his own production company, still writes and directs everything. But now his movies are all like too big. Like they're all just these monstrous things where he's like, we have to travel to every single country and make these ridiculous plots that transcend space and time.
The pincer movement.
Right. Making a pincer movement movie is not okay. That was good movie, but good Lord. Wait, so this whole operation's a pincer movement? Yeah. And I started it? Yeah. In the past? Yeah.
But okay. Why? Posterity.
So the movie can happen. Like that's the logic behind the whole movie is just why did we do the movie? So the movie could happen. Oh,
so
I got
we could make the movie.
Because it would have been a lot more logical to just start the movie at the end, the way he did with Memento, and he starts the pincer movement and then it ends with the beginning, with that, which is actually the end. But no, I digress. At any rate, all the other filmmakers of the modern era, I think, are they're closer to being Christopher Nolan or David Fincher, like of the top ones.
Yeah.
Villeneuve is another great example. He's basically the same as David Fincher.
Yeah.
He comes in and he's good enough that his vision is imprinted upon the entire movie, but it's still a studio process dictated by profit. Quentin Tarantino's closer to being Kubrick. Like, he's so sought after that he's kind of on his own timetable. He writes all his own stuff. He is not dictated to really by the studios, but at the same time, he's also had multiple unfinished and unreleased projects that are probably a result of his combative personality and his unwillingness to compromise on certain things.
Yeah, you can also see his own like watermark in all of his movies as well. Like his name, his signature is on the scenes. Like you can just feel that in like any Tarantino film.
Yeah, like in the same way that Tom Cruise, like clapping his hands while walking in the street or saying a line where you're like, why did he say it weird like that? And you know it's because he had to do the scene 300 times until he said it just the right way because his brain was broken. It's the same in a Tarantino movie when somebody says the funny line and then the camera zooms in on their face as they get shot. It's like, okay, yeah.
Did Kubrick do that to him?
Do what?
To Tom Cruise? Was he part of his like incessant like perfecting of lines?
There was a scene where he had to walk through a door that they shot 80 times because he wouldn't walk through the door correctly.
Yeah, I'm saying, like, was Tom Cruise like that before Eyes Wide Shut, or was that an after thing?
Like a crazy person?
No, like his insistence that they have to reshoot something so he can get the inflection and the hand movement like expertly.
What are you asking me? Are you asking?
My question is, was Tom Cruise like that before Eyes Wide Shut, or did Kubrick completely psychologically break him down to the point where he thought that he has to do everything 100 times?
Tom Cruise was definitely already a crazy person.
Right. And then he did that, and then he did Magnolia, and then he kept going.
This movie literally caused Magnolia's entire shooting schedule to be pushed back 6 months.
Eyes Wide Shut.
Yes, Paul Thomas Anderson had to visit the set to make sure Tom Cruise was still planning to do the movie. And Kubrick was like, yeah, we're almost done. It took another like 3 months because of the like Tom Cruise walks through the door. Yeah, we got to do it again. He didn't walk through the door, right? And then you watch those scenes in the movies, and it's literally just he just walks through the door. There's no reason it needed to take 100 times. But somewhere in Kubrick's head, he was clearly just counting things with a stopwatch. Like, if his foot isn't 6 inches above the floor at this time marker I made up, we're doing it again.
Yeah. Didn't they also construct for Eyes Wide Shut? They constructed like an entire like cityscape, like an entire city number of streets for him to walk down.
Yeah, the one that's in your background right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm good. That should do Kubrick.
Terrence Malick, maybe that's the example of the only guy modern day who's similar. Reclusive, hates the film industry. People come to him to work. He still writes all his own stuff. It's all quite misunderstood upon release, and people call him pretentious and soulless and weird.
It's just a bunch of fields of grain. Why is it fields of grain? Those amber hues. I don't know why I'm doing a David Lynch voice, but whatever. Hope you guys enjoyed sticking with us for this long through Kubrick. Any Kubrick movie that you haven't seen, I would just recommend watching. I'm sure that I will get through any of those that I haven't seen as well. And I'm sure this
first.
I'm sure this is not the last we will be discussing Mr. Stanley Kubrick. That's all for now, folks. Till next time. Bye-bye.